Welcome to Coffee with the Risk Manager, where we share a cup of coffee with colleagues and discuss all things risk management in higher education. My name's Stacie Kroll, and I'm the Executive Director for Gallagher's Higher Education Practice. On this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome John Allen, Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for Baylor University. John, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your expertise and experience?
Thank you, Stacie. I appreciate the invite to come and talk with everyone today. Been with Baylor University over 22 years now, working both in cybersecurity for a good portion of my career, as well as transitioning now into doing more information technology management as well. And seeing how those two things between managing risk and actually application of the technology and operations meld together has been really interesting for me. And I think a highlight as we look forward into how is cybersecurity going to work and risk management is going to work in the future.
Yeah, that's the melding of the two positions, I'm sure, is something that Baylor really appreciate. So thank you for being here today. And are we drinking out of any special coffee mug today?
So I joke, as you can see, this is my Baylor Bears mug. And as you'd imagine, not only is it because I work for the university, but it's a unique journey in that I've actually came here to go to school at 17 years old and never left. And so worked my way up through the organization to the point that now I'm the one overseeing the IT operation for the entire university.
That's a great career trajectory. So I don't have a special mug today. I just have my favorite mug, and it's just a really good, solid coffee mug. No special memory, just comfortable and a daily use. So on this episode, we're going to be discussing the importance of conducting cyber risk assessments for our third-party vendors, particularly during that procurement process. And we're also going to be sharing a valuable tool that talented members of EDUCAUSE like yourself have developed and created for a community to simplify and standardize this process. Third-party cyber risk is definitely not something new to us, but I certainly think following the SolarWinds attack, we're kind of addressing this with a renewed energy. In addition, we've seen substantial increases in both the frequency and severity of cyber attacks this last year, whether it's third-party or first-party losses. And that has certainly caught our attention as well as our insurers' attention. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about some of the resources and tools available for EDUCAUSE that can support risk managers in this initiative.
Absolutely. And I'll start with a little bit of a story. So the HACVAT turned out to originally be a shared assessment opportunity. I was at a conference in 2016. It was the EDUCAUSE Security Professionals Conference presenting with Nick Lewis from Internet 2. And we were doing a presentation about cloud services. And I threw out the crazy idea of how many people would be interested in shared security risk assessments. And when you have those crazy ideas, most of them fall on the floor. And every once in a while you hit one and it's like, wow, if I could have just caught this lightning in a bottle. And this was the opportunity. The response from the community was unbelievable.
Wow.
And we were very quickly, within a month or two, able to form a group that was all around shared security assessments. And it was a partnership between EDUCAUSE, RIN ISAC, as well as Internet 2. And that's one of the things about this that makes it very unique. It is actually three organizations coming together to support a community initiative. And so it's all community driven. It's all been volunteer based. And in 2016, we were able to release the first version of what came to be known as the HECVAT. Why the heck that, I think, is always interesting. People are like, you started with shared security assessments. Well, attorneys got involved and they said, you really can't be sharing all this information around. We said, okay, well, what's the next best thing? And the next best thing was, let's create tools that are standardized so that campuses aren't walking around with what I joked was their special snowflake questionnaires, which you guys have all seen, right?
Yep.
And vendors don't have full-time equivalents sitting there spending all of their time completing these special snowflake questionnaires, right? And so the first one came out, it was over 200 questions. We quickly got feedback from the community that may be too much, right? And so we then kind of have continued to mature. And I think what's unique is now over 5 years into this, it has become a very popular tool among higher education. We're seeing it now being used in K through 12. And this isn't just within the US, this is international as well. And so to see the adoption of this tool and the appreciation from the community, both the user community of higher education as well as the vendor community, has been something really unique. And I think for me professionally, it's been so nice to be able to give something back in my time to the community that's been able to kind of recognize such a big win for everybody.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you for having the wild idea that didn't fall on the floor, but also sharing that with the community writ large. So let's break down the acronym. What does HECVAT actually stand for?
So this is kind of the funny part, right? As you can tell, it was tech people to
Yeah.
start with,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
We didn't have anybody with marketing in the room. And so this is kind of the ugly child that all of a sudden everybody knows. And you go and do a Google search, and hey, there it is, because nobody would ever use this acronym. It was originally Higher Education Cloud Vendor Assessment Toolkit, right?
That's a lot. That's a
Which
mouthful.
makes a lot of sense, but it is a mouthful, which is why you hear people just say heck that. Over the last year and a half, we've pivoted that a bit. And some of it comes with some of the additional tools that have been released. And it's become Higher Education Community Vendor
Great.
Assessment Toolkit, right? Because it's not just about the cloud anymore. It's
Right.
also about some of the things that you're doing on prem. It's about triage, it's about processes. And so we wanted to really encompass that in the name. But it's funny because you don't have a whole lot of name collisions when you're walking around with a name like the HECVAT, and that
HECVAT.
has
Yeah.
also been unique and very helpful as we try to get people to hear about it and learn about it.
It's catchy for sure. So all right, so Educause has created the HECVAT tool, which is this standard set of questions that we hand to vendors to fill out, and it helps us interpret the answers to those questions and evaluate what we feel is the cyber risk associated with that vendor arrangement, right? So when we first started exploring this, we noticed that there's three different versions of the HECVAT tool. And I imagine some of that is just evolution as you guys kind of grow and you meet the needs of your broader community. But let's talk about those three versions of the HECVAT tool and why you have them and when you would use which one.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned early on, the first version is what we'd call the full, right?
Okay.
This is soup to nuts. It was over 200 questions, extremely thorough, extremely thorough. The reality is that tool is built for situations where you're dealing with a high risk situation, right? You have healthcare data, you have credit card information. This is when you are doing a very deep assessment and you're going top to bottom to make sure that you are minimizing all risk because the risk to the data or the processes involved are so high. For most organizations, the times you're doing those sort of assessments probably is in the minority of the
Yeah.
assessments that you're doing now. And so, with that maturity and with that feedback, became hey, we need something else. And that something else became the HECVAT Lite.
Okay.
And the HECVAT Lite is a much smaller tool that's really geared towards the majority of what a lot of our current IT cloud projects look like today. A lot of our SaaS services, things like that. It has been a tool that was released, I believe, I think it was the second year after the
Okay.
first HECVAT was released. And with that, it was really about making this more of a tool that was accessible for everybody to be able to use it for what they needed, right? You don't need 220 questions for a lot of what we're doing. But boy, you need the 60 questions. That 60 questions is really important if I'm doing some base level assessment. And then we kind of layered on the other one. And the next one was on premise. Because if you think about it, so much we talk about cloud and hosted and everything else, there's still a lot that we're plugging into our physical networks. And the questions that you're asking when you're plugging into your physical network look pretty different than the questions you ask when you're talking about a hosted system or a cloud provided application or infrastructure. And so that was the reason that the third version came around, was really to work to address that whole component around on premise and what does the on premise, how's patching going to work, where does responsibility lie, all these different components that probably aren't present when you're doing the evaluation of those other types of services. The other thing I'd highlight that was a very interesting evolution as we went through this process, initially this was a very static Excel spreadsheet, right? You take information in and an analyst is going to have to spend a lot of time interpreting it. About 2.5 years ago, we introduced the version, it actually has automated scoring. So
Oh,
now your risk analyst can go in there and fill out a few categories of, the data and things like that, and you're getting some basic triage automated scoring in the toolkit.
that's
It's been
great.
really interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it seems
Vendors,
like these three different versions just make it really easy for folks to navigate. If a lot of our
absolutely.
clients, a lot of our community doesn't have a CISO, right? So
Right.
this is a growing position, and it feels like having
Absolutely.
the light and then the third version, it really kind of allows the non CISOs to be able to navigate the tool, which speaks to your accessibility piece. So, how have vendors responded to this? What's their perception of it?
We were nervous, I'll be honest, because you come out, especially the first version, it was over 200 questions. People are like, "Oh boy," they're just being one of these overkill,
Yeah.
tinfoil hat risk people running around, things like that. And so what was interesting is about the second year, we started getting some feedback. And it was interesting. For me personally, I would be sitting in meetings with vendors and I'd say, "Hey, we'd like you to complete a heck bet." And they'd be like, "Oh, that'd be great." Okay. Tell me a little bit more. Oh, well, I used to spend my evenings filling out all these spreadsheets for all these different schools or questionnaires, and you've given me my life back. I
Yeah, they
literally
can
had
just
a vendor
copy and
sit there
paste.
and,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it was like, wow. Now all of a sudden, how impactful is this? This crazy idea has gone from something that was like pie in the sky to this is actually like giving people a resource where it's improving their lives. It's improving the quality of what we're getting as institutions. At the end of the day, and you guys have experienced this, right? The sales guy who's filling
yeah,
out the questionnaire probably isn't the best
no
person to
idea.
complete it, but all of a sudden, if the vendor only has to complete it once, they're going to put those high end resources to make sure that good quality answers are being completed in the sheet. And the turnaround time to receive those went from months and weeks to generally 24 to 48 hours because they have it sitting on the shelf ready to go.
That's
And
great.
so, how has that improved assessments and
Yeah,
campus service delivery and all those sort of things as well?
yeah, that's phenomenal. So, being one of the primary architects of this tool, what's your vision for the future of the tool and the impact it has on our third party cyber risk?
So it's interesting. This is a community tool, and we spend a lot of our time going out and presenting to the community, getting feedback from the community, and understanding what they want next. There's two things they're asking for more than anything. One is privacy, a component to be able to assess privacy. The challenge we have with privacy, especially with this being an international tool, it's really hard to ask privacy questions that are going to be universally applicable at this point. So that's one we're definitely keeping our fingers on, keeping our pulse on. The other one is around literally accessibility, being able to mirror how do we do accessibility of technology assessments at the same time that we're doing cyber risk assessments. And that's an area that we're actively working on. And I would ask everyone to kind of keep their ears open because you're probably going to hear some very interesting announcements in the fall regarding that.
That's really, as a former compliance professional who has a fair share of experience in accessibility in 504, that's very exciting, and we're very thankful for Educats to take the charge on this. So ultimately, right, this tool is created by our IT friends for our IT friends, but the reason we invited you on was really to give this tool, it's a great opportunity to have our risk managers have this tool in hand as we're
Absolutely.
articulating the risk, as we're bringing this risk up, whether it's in our ERM meetings or just to our supervisors or senior leadership, and saying, have you thought about this in a real in depth way? We can come with a tool in hand to say, here's something that's developed for our community on how to address this. So, again, thank you for the wild idea. Thank you for being the architect. I think we're going to see a much wider adoption following SolarWinds. And thank you for being on this episode of Coffee with the Risk Manager. Have a great
Thank,
day.
thank you, Stacie.